Millionaire CEO sees a waitress with 3 girls who look exactly like him, and he's stunned. Barcelona at midday in the middle of summer, the heat crashed down like fire. The asphalt steamed, and scooters zipped past as if traffic laws didn't exist. Amid the honking horns and hurried footsteps, Julian Bennett stepped out of a sleek black car, his face tight with irritation. He wore a deep navy suit, crisp white shirt buttoned to the top, and a perfectly knotted tie. Everything about him was polished, except his mood. Julian had a business lunch with investors at a 5-star restaurant downtown, but his empty stomach and growing fatigue made him turn down a smaller street. He had no particular reason, just the aroma of fresh croissants and dark coffee sneaking through the car window, pulling him in like a quiet siren song. He walked toward a small cafe called Café Del Mar. No flashy signs, just a weathered wooden board, a few small tables on the sidewalk, red and white checkered tablecloths, and a lavender plant hanging lazily by the door. From inside came the soft sound of an old Spanish song, slow, melancholic, like time itself was moving backward. Julian pushed open the door. Cool air brushed his face, carried by a ceiling fan turning in slow rhythm. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon floated gently in the air. A group of college students chatted near the window. An elderly couple shared a pastry in the far corner. And at the back of the room, a woman moved between tables, balancing plates with practiced urgency. She had loosely braided brown hair, slouched shoulders from exhaustion, and sun-kissed cheeks flushed red. But Julian froze. He recognized Clara Russo instantly. No second look needed, no name required. That gaze, still the same, strong, guarded, distant. Before he could gather his thoughts, his eyes fell on a small table near the counter. 3 little girls sat there, folding paper napkins. One was making a flower, another was drawing with markers. All around, 6 years old. Long hair, blue-green eyes, and something made Julian's heartbeat go wild. They had his eyes. That soft arch of the eyebrows, the way they tilted their heads when focused, even the tight-lipped smile he saw in the mirror for 38 years. For a single moment, the world went silent. All sound disappeared. Julian stood frozen in the middle of a buzzing cafe. Clara looked up. Their eyes met, and in the tiniest sliver of time, they were both pulled back into a past neither had dared revisit. Then she turned and vanished behind the swinging kitchen door. Julian remained still, heart pounding, mind spinning with a single question he wasn't ready to face. Could they be mine? Julian couldn't recall how he ended up walking toward the girls' table. It felt as if some invisible force was pulling him there. Not reason, instinct. His legs moved before his brain could catch up. The 3 girls looked up at the same time as he approached. One, dressed in a pink dress, tilted her head and asked, "Who are you?" Another squinted suspiciously, still holding her half-folded napkin. "Do you know us?" Julian opened his mouth, his voice rasping slightly. I'm not sure, but maybe." Before he could say another word, Clara burst through the kitchen door and stepped right between him and the girls. Her eyes were sharp, her voice low but firm. "Don't speak to them." Julian stepped back half a pace, raising his hand slightly, trying to calm things down. I only wanted—" "Not here, not now," Clara cut in. "They're mine. And you—" She didn't meet his eyes as she finished. "Go back to your world, Julian. This one doesn't belong to you." Julian's chest tightened. Before he could respond, a sharp voice sliced through the room. "Clara, I don't pay you to chat with customers." A middle-aged man in a flour-stained apron emerged from behind the counter. The owner. His face wore the kind of frown reserved for permanent disappointment. Clara bit her lip and nodded. "I'll get back to work." The man turned to Julian, giving him a dismissive once-over before smirking. And you? You here for the food, or just to stare at my staff? Julian stayed composed, his eyes still on Clara. I'm waiting to order, but clearly customers aren't much of a priority here. We serve food, not fantasies, the owner snapped. One of the girls, the one in the yellow dress, frowned deeply and said, Don't talk to my mom like that. Clara bent down to soothe her, but Julian kept his gaze on her. He asked gently, Clara, when do you finish your shift? She stood straight, her eyes glistening but firm. I don't want to see you. Just 5 minutes. Tell me when and where. She hesitated, then nodded subtly toward a bench outside the cafe. Half an hour. There? But if you don't see me come out, don't follow. Understood? Julian nodded. He returned to his table. He didn't order, didn't touch his phone, didn't think about meetings or deadlines. He just stared out the window, where 3 little girls had eyes just like his. Half an hour later, Julian sat on the bench across from the cafe, checking his watch like someone caught between dread and hope. When the minute hand landed exactly on the 30th mark, Clara stepped out. She was no longer in her apron, holding a bottle of water, her expression as still as stone. She didn't sit too close, just enough to speak, but still distant. You came, Julian said softly. I'll only stay a few minutes. Those girls, they're mine, aren't they? The question spilled out like something he'd been holding in for years. Clara said nothing for a long moment. Her eyes didn't meet his. They followed the passers-by as if searching for answers among indifferent strangers. Yes? Just one word, but it knocked the breath out of Julian like he'd run headfirst into a storm. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you find me? You think I didn't try? Clara's voice stayed calm, but now her eyes locked onto his, full of hurt. I called. I emailed. I went to your old office in Madrid. No one let me in. The secretary said you'd moved. People told me you didn't want to be found. Julian paused, staring down at the tiled pavement. I didn't know. Clara gave a bitter smile. And you honestly believe that? He sighed. I thought you moved on. You're strong like that. I did move on, but not alone. I didn't get the luxury of forgetting. Every day I look into 3 pairs of eyes that look just like the man who walked away. Julian clenched his hands. Regret surged through him in crashing waves. I want to make it right. It's late, Clara said. Her voice was no longer cold, just tired. But not impossible. Julian looked up. You can see them, if you're real about it. But no vanishing, no promises you won't keep. If you come back, it has to mean you're staying. He nodded. And first, she continued, steady gaze fixed on his. You'll get a DNA test, not because I doubt you, but because you need to see it for yourself. Julian answered quietly. Yes, I want that, and I'll do it right, this time. Clara stood. No goodbye, no backward glance. She simply walked away, leaving him there with a heart spinning and a question that had finally been answered, only to unlock 1,000 more he hadn't yet dared to ask. The next afternoon, Julian arrived at the park 20 minutes early. He chose a bench tucked behind a row of trees, hands in the pockets of his coat, eyes watching the cobblestone path. For the first time in years, he didn't check his phone, didn't think about work. There was only one image replaying in his mind. 3 little girls with eyes that mirrored his so perfectly, it hurt. Right on time, Clara appeared. She wore a plain white blouse, jeans, and had her hair tied back. She sat a short distance away, notebook and pen in hand. The way she glanced at Julian was still guarded, like someone forcing herself not to believe. You're early, she said, not looking at him. I couldn't think about anything else. You can watch, but don't interfere. Julian nodded. Ahead, in the open space, the 3 girls played. Isla, the one in a blue dress, was drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. Noah, in yellow, gathered fallen leaves and lined them up carefully. Lucia, wearing pink, ran in circles, humming a song too soft to recognize. Julian couldn't take his eyes off them. He watched every gesture, every expression, the way they laughed, and realized he'd lived all these years without knowing these 3 lives even existed. No dreams, no gut instinct. Nothing. "Are they okay?" he asked, his voice dry. Clara closed her notebook. "They're healthy. Lucia's allergic to dust. Noah needs glasses to read. Isla doesn't talk much, not because she's shy. She just picks her moments." "They carry your last name?" "Of course. I wasn't going to give them the name of someone who wasn't there." Julian swallowed hard. "I want a DNA test, not because I doubt, but because I need to see it for myself. And I want to do this legally, properly." Clara turned to him for the first time. "Fine, but don't think that will change anything. You don't get to show up and act like the world is yours." "I'm not here to claim. I'm here to understand. I didn't come for me. I came for them." Clara studied him for a long moment. Her gaze was probing, testing, but something in it began to soften. Just then, Lucia ran toward them, holding a dried heart-shaped leaf. "Mommy, look at this," she called out, then turned to Julian. "Who are you?" Clara reached down and stroked her daughter's hair. "Just an old friend, sweetheart." Julian smiled, heart heavy. He didn't know when he'd earned the word Dad, but right then he knew he was staying, for however long it would take. 3 days later, Julian received the DNA test results from a private clinic he had rushed to schedule. He didn't eat breakfast, didn't open his laptop, didn't check his messages. He just sat on the couch, thick envelope in hand, heart pounding. When he opened it and read the line, 99.99% probability of paternity, it felt like the air had been sucked from his body. Isla Bennett Russo, Noah Bennett Russo, Lucia Bennett Russo. In black and white, what his heart already knew became undeniable truth. The paper slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. Julian leaned back into the couch, staring up at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he was starting something new or paying the price for something lost. But one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away now. That evening, he met Clara after her shift. She had just washed her hands, still wearing her light jacket, and hadn't taken out the clip from her hair. Julian handed her a copy of the results, but she didn't look at it right away. "You already knew, even before this paper, didn't you?" she asked. "Yes, but now there's no way back." Clara nodded. No smile, no refusal. "I don't want to fight. I just want to be present, the right way." "This isn't a weekend thing," she said. "It's not solved with a few park visits or some ice cream." "I know. I'm not promising perfection, but I'll be there. And if there are any legal steps I need to take, I'm ready." Clara took the paper in her hands. For the first time in years, she didn't look at Julian like a ghost from her past, but like a man trying to step into the future. Not for himself, but for 3 little girls who had his exact eyes. Julian started visiting more often. At first, it was just a few times a week, brief moments at the park or ice cream shop. Slowly, Clara allowed him to pick the girls up from school, join them at the bookstore, draw with them, or play puzzle games on the living room rug. Isla was still quiet, but her eyes began to seek Julian when she wanted to show something. Lucia chattered nonstop, telling stories while chewing cookies, sometimes saying, "Daddy Julian," without thinking, then blushing immediately. And Noah watched the most. She didn't talk much, but when Julian did something right, her eyes lit up. Julian started to believe that, even late, he still had a chance. But that chance was more fragile than he thought. On Friday afternoon, Noah had her first school performance. She was playing the lead, a butterfly. Julian had promised to come. He'd even set reminders on his phone, picked out the light blue shirt Noah once said made him look like a superhero. But at 5:10, as he was about to leave the office, his phone rang. The Singapore investors had arrived early. "They're here," his assistant said, urgency in her voice. "They're only waiting for you. If you don't come, they'll leave." Julian checked the time. 5:15. The play started at 5:30. The school was a 25-minute drive. He stood, grabbed his keys. Then he put them down and walked back to the meeting room. By the time he reached the school, it was empty. Only Clara remained, leaning against a stone pillar at the gate, arms crossed, her expression cold as ice. "I'm sorry," he began. "Don't say it to me." She nodded toward the car. "Say it to her." Noah sat in the back seat, her butterfly costume wrinkled, face blank. Glitter still clung to her cheeks. "I was a butterfly," she whispered, "but now I flew away." Julian had no words. That night, Clara didn't reply to messages, didn't call back, didn't open the door. He sat in his car outside their home until nearly midnight. One thought repeated in his mind like a drumbeat. Second chances don't come 3 times. 3 days passed and Clara still hadn't replied. Julian texted every morning, every night. No response, no sign that he was still allowed near. On the 4th morning, he came to her door as usual, but this time it wasn't about promises or hope. It was because he needed to know they were okay. The door wasn't locked. He rang the bell. No answer. But after a few minutes, small footsteps echoed down the stairwell. Lucia, ran down, hair messy, barefoot. "Daddy Julian," she shouted. "Mom won't wake up. She's on the couch and she's really hot." Julian rushed upstairs. Clara lay curled on the sofa, cheeks flushed, breath shallow. A cold sweat soaked her neckline, and her hand trembled as it reached for the glass of water, but couldn't lift it. A cup of untouched water sat beside her. "Clara," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me?" She nodded faintly. "Just tired. I'm fine." "You have a fever. Have you eaten?" She closed her eyes, murmured, "No one to cover my shift? No one to cook for the girls?" "Now you do," Julian said, voice steady. "Rest. I've got this." Clara tried to protest, but her eyes blurred. She had no strength left. That night, Julian made chicken porridge. Clumsily, but with care. He changed the girls into pajamas, stumbled through fairy tales, kissed each forehead as they drifted off to sleep. Then he returned to the living room and found Clara watching him from the sofa. "Don't you have a meeting tonight?" she asked, voice raspy. "No, tonight I'm here." Clara closed her eyes. "I don't know how to do this with you." "Neither do I," Julian replied, sitting beside her. "But I know one thing. I don't want to do this without you and the girls." In the quiet of that small room, under the warm lamp glow, neither of them said another word. But both knew. Some wounds don't need medicine, only someone willing to stay. On Monday morning, Julian arrived at the office earlier than usual. He didn't bring a laptop, didn't wear a suit, and didn't knot a tie. Just a rolled-up shirt and a folded piece of paper in his breast pocket. The top-floor boardroom of Bennett Group was lit. The executive team was already seated. Matteo, the co-founder and friend, sat at the head of the table, eyes cautious. "Another staffing shift?" Matteo asked, half joking. Julian stood, resting one hand on the chair. "I'm not resigning," he began calmly, "but I'm stepping down from daily operations, indefinitely." The room fell silent. One person set their pen down. Another let out a quiet sigh. "This about those 3 little girls?" Matteo asked, now serious. Julian nodded. "They're my daughters, and I'm starting to understand what that actually means." Matteo looked him straight in the eyes. "What about the Milan expansion, the Singapore investors?" "Matteo," Julian said slowly, "I'm handing over what I spent years building because I've finally found something more valuable, and I'm not going to lose it." He placed the letter of authorization on the table. There was a pause, then Julia, the executive assistant, stepped forward and gently placed her hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement. Julian walked out of the boardroom. No one called him back. No one questioned further. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was leaving something to truly return. 2 months later, Julian opened his new restaurant, but this time it was unlike anything he'd ever launched before. The place was called Tres, Spanish for three. Not because it was his third branch, but because it represented something sacred: Isla, Noah, and Lucia. The cafe was designed as a declaration of family. There was an indoor play zone with soft cushions and storybooks, a work-friendly corner for parents while their kids colored at adjacent tables. The menu included healthy meals specifically designed for children, reviewed by a nutritionist. And most notably, all staff were offered flexible shifts if they were raising kids. Clara stood in the middle of the cafe on opening day, taking in the scene. Toddlers crawling across the rugs, laughter bouncing off the walls, the scent of fresh pastries floating in the air. Julian was busy carrying juice to a family table, shirt wrinkled, face beaming, as if breathing fully for the first time. "You really built this for the girls?" she asked as they sat at the bar for a short break. Julian nodded, eyes still on the 3 little ones playing in the corner. "I've built a lot of things," he said. "Restaurants, brands, supply chains. But this is the first time I've built a life." Clara looked at him, really looked, for the first time in years, and the guarded expression was gone. In her eyes, there was something quiet, maybe forgiveness, maybe belief, or maybe just presence. One weekend afternoon, Julian came to pick up the girls like usual, but this time Clara stood at the door holding a large backpack. "I've packed everything," she said. "If you want, you can take them somewhere farther today. Cassinet Park or the beach. Your choice." Julian blinked, then nodded. "I'd love to." Clara handed him the girls. "Bring water, sunscreen, and patience." "With these 3 angels?" "Easy." Julian smiled, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. He didn't know why this time felt different, but he could feel it. Something in the way Clara handed over the girls, the absence of hesitation in her eyes, as if she was placing part of her heart in his hands. They went to Cassinet Park. Not the crowded playground, but a quiet open field with shade, a few benches, and birdsong weaving through the wind. Julian laid out the picnic blanket, unpacked cookies, fruit, orange juice, and a small speaker playing soft music. Isla read a book. Noah sketched leaves in her notebook. Lucia climbed onto Julian's legs and started telling stories about dragons, princesses, and a superhero dad. As the sun lowered, Julian lay on his side, Lucia resting her head on his chest. Her small hand clutched his shirt, like she was afraid he'd disappear. Then a familiar voice called out from behind. "I wasn't planning to come." Clara. Julian turned. She wore a light blue dress, hair down, no makeup. Her eyes were softer than the evening sun. "But I couldn't help it," she said, sitting down beside him. "I'm glad you did," Julian said, his voice quieter now. They sat in silence, watching the girls play. After a moment, Julian asked, "Did you ever think we'd sit together like this again?" "No," Clara replied. "I thought it was all gone, but maybe losing it helped me see what's worth keeping." Julian said nothing, just nodded. After a moment, he turned to her, eyes honest. "Can you give me another chance? Not to start over, but to continue. This time, without leaving." Clara looked at the 3 girls laughing under the trees, then back at him. "Don't thank me," she whispered, "unless you're truly planning to stay." Julian smiled. "This time, I have nowhere else to go but here." Friday brought a light rain. Puddles shimmered under sunlight, peeking through thick clouds. Julian held an umbrella, walking his 3 daughters to school. Today was the school-wide art competition, and Noah was one of the youngest contestants. She had been up early, preparing her colored pencils and carrying her drawing board. Clara had tied a pink ribbon to it. Julian wore a plain white shirt with no tie, exactly as Noah requested. "I don't want you to look like a boss. I like when you look like Dad." At 9 a.m., as he was retying Lucia's shoelaces outside the school gate, his phone rang. It was Julia, his former assistant. Her voice was urgent. "Julian, I know you didn't want interruptions, but the Swiss investors just arrived. They can only meet today, 10 sharp." He glanced at Noah, beaming by the classroom door. Remembered her words. "You have to sit in the front row. I'm drawing our home, with you in it." "I can't," Julian answered quietly. "Are you sure? If you don't show, we might lose them." "If we lose them, that's fine, but I'm not letting my daughter lose me. Not again." Julia was silent for a few seconds, then chuckled softly. "You know, once you told me fatherhood wasn't part of the business plan. Looks like you've redirected your investments." Julian smiled and hung up. Inside the small elementary auditorium, the artwork was taped across the walls. There were castles, spaceships, oceans, and in the center, Noah's piece. An orange house, 3 little girls in dresses, and a man holding a frying pan, wearing an apron, grinning from ear to ear. Beneath the picture were the words, "Where Daddy doesn't work, he stays home." When Noah's name was announced as the winner of the Family Emotion category, Julian stood and clapped first. She ran to him, threw her arms around his neck, and whispered, "I knew you'd come." And Julian realized this was the true success. No shares, no contracts, just a promise, and the act of keeping it. On a Monday morning, Julian woke up early, not to check financial reports or reply to emails, but to make breakfast for the 3 little girls still fast asleep in the next room. He toasted bread, fried eggs, and mixed cocoa with just the right sweet milk ratio Isla had taught him. Clara walked into the kitchen, her hair messy, smiling softly. "You getting used to waking up at 6 yet?" Julian nodded. "I've never been happy like this before." The new apartment wasn't as fancy as his old penthouse, but it had laughter, the smell of baked bread, and colored pencil marks on the wall, proof that this place was alive, not just existing. A few days later, a magazine published a piece about Julian. From CEO to full-time father, a redefinition of success. The photo showed him wiping tables at Tres, with Noah wearing a chef's hat, Clara jotting down an order, and the other 2 girls coloring menus. The article called it a family-style enterprise. But Julian didn't care about titles. What mattered came at the end of the day, when Isla rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Daddy really came home on time." That night, before bed, Julian reopened the notebook he'd started the day he learned he was a father. He added one more line. "No meeting is more important than story time. No restaurant more precious than laughter in this kitchen." Clara stepped out of the bedroom, leaning against the doorframe, a cup of tea in her hands. "What are you writing?" Julian looked up and smiled. "My legacy." She walked over and kissed his forehead. "If that's your legacy, then I think I want to be part of it." Julian took her hand, and in that moment he knew. He hadn't just rebuilt his life. He had built something to leave behind, something worth keeping. It was a warm spring Sunday afternoon. Julian took the whole family for a picnic on a hill just outside the city, where wildflowers grew tall and the breeze carried their scent through the air. The 3 little girls ran barefoot through the grass, tossing petals and making flower crowns, while Clara sat on the picnic blanket, laughing and snapping photos of the chaos she loved. Julian stood a few steps away, fingers brushing the small box in his pocket, heart racing. As the sun dipped low over the hill, he approached Clara and held out his hand. "Walk with me for a bit?" She looked up, tilted her head, and smiled. "We're in the middle of nature. What more of a walk do you need?" A walk into the next chapter. They stepped away from the laughter and ran towards the old oak tree. Julian stopped beneath it and turned to the woman he had never stopped loving, even after he had once lost her. "I used to think showing up was enough, but I've learned that showing up is just the beginning. It's commitment that holds a family together." He pulled out the box and opened it. Inside was a simple ring with a small stone that shimmered gently in the fading light. "Clara, you gave me back a life I thought I'd lost. But today, I'm asking for a future. With you." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him. "Marry me. So the girls don't just have a dad, but you have a partner too. And I get to love you not just with my actions, but with a promise." She covered her mouth, laughing through her tears. "You idiot, I've been part of this for a long time already. But now, let's call it what it is, husband and wife." She nodded. Yes. So they didn't have a grand wedding. The ceremony was held in the backyard of Tress on a sunny afternoon filled with paper flowers, wooden chairs, and a little white arch. Ela, Noah, and Lucia wore matching white dresses, carried flowers, and led the way down the aisle. The guests were few, just close friends, neighbors, and restaurant staff. But everyone smiled. Nothing else was needed. When Clara appeared in a simple white dress, the girls squealed. "Mommy looks like a princess," Julian whispered as she stood beside him. "You didn't need a wedding dress to make me love you more, but thank you for letting me see it." The ceremony was short. No long speeches, no celebrities, just a vow. We will love, we will listen, we will forgive, and we will always come home together. As they exchanged rings, Isla whispered to Lucia on her tiptoes, "Now it's official." Lucia nodded. "We're forever now." That night, after everyone had left, they sat on the clean floor of the restaurant, eating cold pizza and laughing without pause. Clara leaned on Julian's shoulder. The girls had fallen asleep across both their laps. Julian stroked Noah's hair and whispered, "Now I don't just come home on time. I come home to my wife." Clara heard it and held his hand tighter. Outside, the restaurant lights glowed like fireflies in the dark. They weren't just a family in feeling. They were the home they'd been building, brick by quiet brick, all along.